We're continuing the Brewing with Kveik series, but this time we're not making beer. This time we're making a hard seltzer. I've never made a hard seltzer before, but it seems to be the trendy thing to do, and I heard it's simple and cheap, so we're going to give it a shot. You know what I found out? It is simple and it is cheap, so you should give it a shot too. Stay tuned to find out how to make hard seltzer. We named our version Social Sparkler. Shout out to CH at Homebrew for Life for the name and also the inspiration to make this video. If you enjoy this video and you find it helpful, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Come check out Hopeful Brewing on Instagram and Twitter. Also, check out the last video where we made a German Pils with Kveik yeast. You can find it up here. Let's roll the intro. Let's get started on how to make this Social Sparkler. We based our recipe on the 4-day hard seltzer recipe that can be found on the Omega Yeast website. Our target for ABV though is 5%. Theirs is about 6%. So we just wanted ours to be a little bit more similar to White Claw or Truly and make it a little bit more crushable. We're going to break this video down into about 12 easy steps for you to make this. Step number 1, gather your ingredients. So this is very important. Gather all of these ingredients before you get started. The last thing you want to do is get started and then find out you don't have what you need, and then you're going to have to run to the store. Maybe you have to stop the whole process. Ingredient number 1, you guessed it, water. And we need about 5.25 gallons of water. So I did a little bit more than 5 gallons just because I have a conical fermenter, and we're going to leave a little bit behind for the yeast gathering and whatnot. But what kind of water should you use? Well, I used bottled spring water. So basically you can use any type of water you want. If your water is good enough to drink, then it's probably good enough for seltzer. You might have a favorite mineral water like Pellegrino. Below, you'll find the water profile for Pellegrino if you want to mimic that. Ingredient number 2, sugar, particularly dextrose. So dextrose is just corn sugar. You could also use sucrose, which is just basically table sugar. Realistically, you could use either one. Brewlosophy recently did an article comparing dextrose to sucrose in a seltzer, and they basically determined that there wasn't much of a difference. Ingredient number 3, yeast nutrient. This is very important. Don't skimp on this. So what we used was Omega Yeast has a proper seltzer yeast nutrient, 1 pack of that. It's about 1 ounce. Alternatively, White Labs also makes something called Seltzer Max. You could use that, or you could use something like Yeast wine nutrient, about 1 ounce of that stuff. So realistically, you can use any of those and you'll probably be good to go. I would just probably use anything that is available to you and that is the cheapest. Ingredient number 4, yeast. So you want a clean fermenting yeast, nothing that's going to create a bunch of different flavors here. So the one I recommend is using Lutra by Omega Yeast, and this is a Kveik yeast, so this will have a very fast turnaround time. Otherwise, you could use Paramount by Imperial Yeast, also a good option, but it's going to take a little bit longer. And the last ingredient is flavoring. So we used a flavor extract, mango extract, and there's a lot of great extracts out there. You could use something from Olive Nation, one of the SodaStream ones. I think we used something from like BSG or something like that, but you're going to need some type of flavor extract. Alternatively to flavor extract, you could use some type of real fruit or real spices, something like that. Keep in mind, if you're going to use real fruit, you're adding additional sugars. So there's going to be a little bit higher alcohol content potentially. And also, depending on when you add it in fermentation, it might be a little bit sweeter and taste more like alcoholic juice versus, an actual seltzer. Okay, once we have all our ingredients rounded up, we can move on to the next step, which is heating our water. So we're going to heat our 5.25 gallons to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so step number 3 is we're going to want to turn off our heat and we're going to add our sugar, and we're going to make sure we're going to thoroughly stir. We're turning off the heat just to make sure we don't scorch any sugars, but you could leave it on as well. You just have to make sure that you stir thoroughly and make sure you don't let any of that sugar sink down to the bottom where your heat source is coming from and burn. So my recommendation, just turn it off, stir it in, turn your heat back on. Step number 4, we're going to bring our sugar water solution to a boil, and we're going to let it boil for about 10 minutes. Step number 5, we're going to turn off our heat after the 10-minute boil, and we're going to add our yeast nutrient. And we're going to mix it in, let it whirlpool for about 10 minutes. Just make sure that it's fully dissolved. Step 6, we want to chill our sugar, water, yeast nutrient solution to about 85 degrees if we're using Lutra-Kveik, or 75 degrees Fahrenheit if we're using Paramount from Imperial. And at this point, it's probably a good idea, once it's cooled down, to take an original gravity sampling. If for about a 5% alcohol hard seltzer, you're going to want about a 1037 original gravity reading. Step number 7. After our solution is cooled down, transfer it into a sanitized fermenter. At this point, you might want to aerate it, which essentially you're adding oxygen into it. If you have like an oxygen stone, you can use that. I personally use I think what's referred to as a wine whip, which is basically like this plastic thing attached to a drill. You just mix it up really well. Okay, step number 8. You've made it. We are going to add our yeast, or my girlfriend refers to it as yeast buddies, and we're going to let them do their work. So this will take about 2 days if you're using Lutra-Kveik, and you want to get to a final gravity of somewhere between 0.995 or 0.998. For us, we got down to, I think, 0.997, and we hit right about our 5% alcohol mark. Step number 9, cold crash. So essentially, we're just going to cool this down to 38 degrees and let it sit 1 to 2 days. And what this does is it lets all of the yeast fall out of suspension, as well as anything else that's in there. There's not really anything else in there other than yeast nutrient. All the sugar should be eaten at this point, but we just want to try to clear up the seltzer as much as possible without going through too much work. I suppose you could also add gelatin or other finings. We didn't add anything like that. It still turned out to be pretty clear. It has a little tint of color to it in a glass, but not much. Some of that could be also attributed to the extract that was added. Step 10, rack to keg. So we're just going to transfer this into the keg. Since we're transferring from a conical fermenter, the Fermentosaurus, to the keg, we did a pressure transfer into a CO2 purged keg. Let it fill up. Step number 11, force carbonate. So we did the old forced carbonation trick of hooking up to CO2 and turning up the PSI to about 30 or 40 PSI and rolling the keg on its side for about 5 minutes. I did it in probably 2 different chunks of like 2.5 minutes or so. And just we want to dissolve as much CO2 into the solution as possible in that amount of time without over-carbonating, obviously. So I wouldn't do it for like 10 or 20 minutes or anything like that. But 3 to 5 minutes should be pretty good. At that point, we turn the CO2 pressure down to serving PSI for well, I have a kegerator with 4 different taps on it. So everything on there is about 12 PSI. And we just let it chill out at that point because we had just basically shaken that up and added CO2 for a little while. So we wanted to let it calm down. Step number 12. Now this is the step that most people can make a big mistake at. And this step is we're going to add our flavoring. And something you need to know is that these flavoring extracts are very strong. Right. You can always add more. You can't take it out once it's in. So I recommend adding about a tablespoon or half a tablespoon at a time to taste. So we opened up the keg at that point and we added a tablespoon, shook it up really well, tasted it. Add another tablespoon, shook it up really well, and then tasted it. And what we were going for is something like a White Claw mango flavor. But the thing about that is our extract is not the same as White Claw. And something else that White Claw does is they add another 2 grams of sugar back into the can after fermentation. So their version is definitely going to be sweeter. So after we added our couple of tablespoons of extract, what we did is we kind of used that as our baseline, and we filled up a glass, and then we about 8 ounces, so it was easily measurable, and we added a milliliter or so at a time into that glass until we got to a taste that we wanted to, and then we tried to upscale that to where we wanted. Now, at some point, we found out it's tasting more and more like the extract, but it's not necessarily getting toward that White Claw flavor that we were looking for. But it was a good subtle flavor that we wanted, and we just kind of left it at that. So to give you an idea how much extract we added, this is a whole bottle. Let's see if we can get it to focus. This is 4 ounces, and it suggests on here in the directions, if it can focus, to add 1 ounce per gallon. If we added this whole bottle to our keg of 5 gallons, which is less even than the recommended amount, it probably would have been an unpleasant flavor. So that's why I'm saying you should really add only a little bit at a time to taste, and then till you get to the point where it tastes good to you, and then stop adding. Okay, or like I said, you could pull off a little bit to the side and then try to upscale, add tiny bit into that to the side and then try to upscale it to your whole keg. And there you have it. You made a hard seltzer. Not so hard. I'm going to leave a link in the description down below to my Brewer's Friend account with the recipe for this hard seltzer. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Leave them in the comments down below, and I will gladly get back to you. So here's how it turned out. It's pretty clear. It's very refreshing. It doesn't necessarily have like the really intense mango flavor. It's just very slight. It almost tastes a little bit honeydew to me. Pretty much everyone who's tried it seems to like it. It's very refreshing, great for warm days. So I recommend give it a shot. Tell me about all the crazy stuff that you create. Leave in the comments down below.